tonight. But so let's get started. And I want to welcome everyone tonight, and especially our priest, Sarah C. Stewart from All Saints, and the very Reverend Tim Black from St. Paul's in Atlanta. Sarah serves as the Associate Rector for Youth, Young Adults, and Innovation at All Saints and in Midtown Atlanta. Her vocation emerged over several decades as she shepherded clients as a financial advisor, while also discerning a spiritual home in the Episcopal Church. Sarah says that God's ironic sense of humor was unmistakable, shaping unconventional pathways for her to discover the joy and wonder of leaning into her baptismal promises through the power of Jesus. She was ordained at National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. after attending Berkeley Divinity School and Yale, and served in diverse community and parish settings in 6 states. She cherishes creative collaboration with colleagues across the wider church and with friends of different faith backgrounds. She enjoyed experimenting in the kitchen, hiking in the mountains of Georgia, Zooming with interplay friends around the globe, reading novels, catching up with her extended family in California, and dreaming up future travel, ever a willing pilgrim on the sacred journey. Tim is currently priest in charge at St. Paul's in Atlanta. He's married to Patricia, and they have 3 children who are 26, 23, and 18. So they are almost empty nesters. He's a competitive tennis player, enjoys reading poetry, playing guitar, singing, riding his e-bike, and his Peloton. Wow. He loves being a parish priest and hopes to be called sometime soon to be a rector. He's led many youth pilgrimage to diverse places like Alaska, Turkey, Ireland, Croatia, and El Camino de Santiago in Spain, and considers himself a full-time pilgrim in his walk with Jesus. He's glad to be here and to be talking tonight with his dear and admired colleague, Sarah Stewart. Sarah, we're going to ask you to open tonight's conversation with a prayer.
Great. I'm going to use my singing bell and ring and give us a moment to breathe, and then close with a prayer from Daily Prayers for All Seasons, a Benedictine prayer companion that I enjoy using every day. So, Jesus, you revealed yourself to the world so that all people might look to you and be saved. May we know the wholeness that you bring. Be our light in the darkness, that we may not stumble, and lift us up again if we fall. All this we ask in your name. The Savior of the nations has come to light our way and heal our wounds. Amen.
Amen. Tonight's subject is pilgrimage, obviously, and I'm going to turn it over to you two.
Sarah, it's so good to be with you.
Yes, you too, Tim.
Having a conversation. Sarah and I worked together for too short a time at All Saints. How you doing this week? What a week this has been, huh?
Yeah, it's. I feel like a lot of people are still trying to digest what has happened in the last 48 hours. I don't know if that's all of y'all's experience, but I think it's a moment that will take some time to take in and discern how we respond faithfully as people who follow Jesus in all the places where he leads us. And this moment feels like an intense one, a very full range of human experience kind of moment. Is that, I see some folks nodding heads, so I don't know if there's more that we might want to share around the room since we're a small community gathered. I think sometimes on pilgrimage, Tim, you probably do this where you invite people to sort of name a word or a phrase of how they arrive in the room. I'd be kind of curious if we could do that tonight, if you're open to that.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be welcome to. I don't know how they have the mute set up, but you could probably put it in the chat or unmute and do it because I think it's important to name the. Name is always like to say name the angels and demons. That once we name these things, then they cease to have all the power over us. And I know that current events this week have really had a drag on and a draw on me. I spent a lot of time online yesterday following the news, and in some ways, the last month or so, last 9 months have been a kind of pilgrimage for all of us. I mean, there's all kinds of stories I know that you could tell and I could tell just about what I've experienced from during this Corona time, having to do Easter and Holy Week online and Christmas online. And we were talking about before we got on some of the ways in which we've discovered new things and new ways of being the church. And it really gets to a principle of pilgrimage that is very important to me. See, I see someone says fatigue. Yeah. That it's all part of it. That on pilgrimage, lost luggage, rain, blisters, exhaustion. In the old days when we were traveling the Camino de Santiago and going to Canterbury and Jerusalem, it was about also danger and starvation. It's less so that way now. It's all part of it. And it's easy to forget that, I think, sometimes, especially when there's so many voices offering so many perspectives and interpretations and particular viewpoints on things that come from that are grown a lot of times not out of reasoned and wise judgment, but also out of anxiety and ambition and things. And drained, yeah, drained's definitely a good one. Yeah, I was telling Sarah today, I came home, I had to do a funeral service today for a beloved parishioner, and I did one of those things where I came home and I was like, well, I'm gonna rest my eyes for 30 minutes. And then it was like an hour and 45 minutes later. So
when I think about that experience of jet lag often on a plane, you try to sleep on the way there so you arrive ready to go, but you're exhausted and you don't know which time of day it is, which time zone you're in. And I felt that kind of whiplash might be the wrong word, but like just deep confusion.
Yeah.
Yesterday in particular, when it seemed like we had some hope on the horizon about possibilities and ways of building and moving forward with the at least the very incessant flow of text messages on our phones will now stop since Tuesday is behind us, right? Yeah. Postcards are still coming in the mail, but the eyes of everyone being on Georgia will sort of abate and recede now, and we can kind of move back toward a more regular season in our life. But yesterday, from morning to midday to afternoon, I felt like I rode the wave of the entirety of a roller coaster of the human experience, just taking in and trying to be present to what was unfolding.
Yeah, it gets to another, it occurs to me that pilgrimages follow this natural arc that we've talked about before. And Joseph Campbell kind of hit it right with the hero's journey. They sort of follow the same arc as the hero's journey, because really a pilgrimage is similar. And I look at yesterday as sort of a threshold moment, because how on pilgrimage you always say, and you think about y'all when you travel, how the day before you leave, even for a vacation, 100 things happen that you have to take care of at the last minute. You can't find your passport. You start having a sore throat. Your favorite piece of luggage has a zipper that busts. Your dog gets sick. Your house sitter calls in and says they can't come. All these things happen that seem like they want to they want to keep you at home and keep you where you are. And there's always this threshold moment before you go where you have to either tear yourself away or literally, take that first step into what's next. And typically what accompanies that is kind of a burst of energy from some source. It can be from outside, it can be from inside, it can be from practical, technical things, but it has always happened to me, always. And that's what yesterday kind of felt like to me. It felt like a little bit of a threshold moment for the country and for a lot of us. Does that sound?
Yeah, someone said trepidation and anticipation. I think that's a perfect pairing of what you're describing.
Yeah, and thanks, Stanley. That's what got me.
It comes from this deep investment that comes from the intentionality of setting your heart toward being open to encountering the holy, of stepping outside your comfort zone, of trying to prepare not only in the things you pack or don't pack, but like trying to prepare your spirit to be open, to be awake, to take in what God has on that journey that you're embarking upon, that has that mixed emotion, because you don't know how it's going to affect you. You don't know how it might change you. You don't know what it's going to require, and if you'll be up for it, right? There's all of that right woven in. Those are perfect words: trepidation and anticipation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that out, because that's what kind of made me think about it too. That's what usually happens in the first part. I'm just curious, what are some of the things that you've been doing to stay grounded and present over the last 9 months, or has it, for me, it's sort of been a little bit of a battle. I've been successful some and failed miserably other times. But when it's been successful, how has it worked well for you?
Yeah, I'm remembering this time you told the story about when you took youth on pilgrimage and you told them they couldn't be on their phones every minute checking up on back home. And I feel like some of the more successful moments of being present to what these last 9 months have invited us to encounter, it has been about recognizing that I need to create space by delinking from certain things, whether that's an incessant flow of information or creating more space in my schedule for, not one Zoom meeting after another, but like going for a walk or clearing my mind or taking a few minutes to actually eat lunch without something in front of me, without multitasking, and being more still or building in some rhythms of pause. That has helped. And my biggest way of saying yes to that has been some of the excursions into nature and going and being in the mountains and saying, yeah, there might be a million things that I need to do on paper on a Saturday, but I'm going to go be present to God in the world and see how opening up my heart to the trees and to the beauty around me, or the air, the waterfalls, taking that in and recognizing that I am a small part of creation. I'm not the ruler of creation, though, our liturgy sometimes likes to put us in that spot, but that God is the sovereign of all of us and I can be a part of the whole. I think that pilgrimage really invites us to take that posture, that we're not always in charge, that we can be a participant and enter the flow. And I feel like intentionally taking time away for less technological input, less information input has been a way to collaborate with God's spirit that always waits for us, right? Always is there longing for that connection, whether we go far away to lean in or go to our own backyard.
Or come to Inman Park, like you and a friend of yours were out in Inman Park a couple of weeks ago. See, I love that about living here. Is I'm in this great walking neighborhood, and my friends will call me up, and sometimes apologetically, but I'm like, "No, come on up on the porch." It's wonderful. And I've had a few that have like the Fristos. They were on their way. They were walking from eating out, and it started pouring down rain, and so they rang our doorbell. And they're like, "Well, if you weren't home, we were just going to sit on your porch." But I love that kind of thing. So you were in Colorado before, and I'm just curious, And I'd like to ask this question about Atlanta and kind of Northeast Georgia. Did you have a favorite spot you go to in Colorado? Because you mentioned nature, and I love it out west. Like that's one place. I'm in Searchers right now, and that's one place where I could live for sure. I love the climate. I love to snowboard and hike. I love how green it is during summer. I mean, did you have a favorite spot out there?
Yes, well, maybe several favorite spots. Um, the Benedictine monastery in Snowmass was one of the places that an ecumenical group of ours would go twice a year on retreat, and being with the monks there and worshiping and entering into those monastic rhythms was very grounding and life-giving. And so I feel like Snowmass and that side of the mountains is a beautiful thing. It's also 5.5 hours from Denver.
Yeah.
So Estes Park and Boulder were my other favorite spots, places where you can get up into the Flatirons or Rocky Mountain National Park and just deeply inhale and exhale the very thin air, but you get used to the thinness of the air, and it's so invigorating, and the wildlife is incredible too. I think you'd really dig it. What about you? What are some of the places you have had the most powerful experiences of connecting with God on pilgrimage?
Well, like locally, I haven't been able to go anywhere like everyone else last 9 months. Mine locally is kind of prosaic. I wish it was a little more kind of unconventional, but I really love going down to the Fort Walton Beach area. I love that part of the Gulf, like Grayton Beach and the national park down there. I love the climate and the water and the topography down there, and I love that Patricia and I will go down there 2 or 3 times a year for a week or two and rent a house, and people will come down and stay with us and kind of come and go as they please, which is nice. And I like it because down there I can also take my mountain bike, and then they've got hundreds of miles of mountain bike trails around there that go through these sort of kind of beach jungles around, and so I can ride my mountain bike and I can play tennis. And so I like going down there pretty regularly. There's something, I used to think I was a mountain person because I grew up in the Northeast Georgia, in the foothills of Northeast Georgia mountains in Gainesville, and spent a lot of time hiking around Unicoi National Park and around Helen and Cleveland. And I mean, that's where my people are from. But I've lately become more of a beach person, I think. But on pilgrimage, I'll have to say I've been to Ireland now 4 times. Let's see, over my lifetime, 4 times. I really love Ireland a lot. And Ireland and Turkey are the 2 places where every time I've been there, I've been to Turkey twice. When I stepped off the plane, something in me clicked and said that I was at home. Something about the place just really clicked with me. I used to wish that I was Irish, but I'm not. I'm really Scottish. And I've been to Scotland too, and I kind of had the same feeling from Scotland, but I haven't spent as much time in Scotland and been out in the kind of in the wilderness much as I was in Ireland. So Ireland, just because I was been there during the summer, and I just have a deep spiritual connection to that place and to the indigenous culture of Ireland. I mean, you don't really think of Ireland having an indigenous culture, but it did. It has an indigenous population and an indigenous culture that the English tried to exterminate. And I got to be very good friends with a man there who runs a tour company whose family's been there for thousands of years. And so I just felt deeply connected there. What about you?
Well, I think being I also got to go to Scotland couple years ago, and being in Iona. And
Stewart, so you're Scottish, right?
yes, I am Scottish. That's part of my heritage. And I think being there was absolutely an incredible experience. And, you know, going to the Holy Land and being in Jerusalem, especially I was there during Ramadan and
Wow.
got to sort of see some of the devotion of the Muslim pilgrims who are coming to be at the rock on the most sacred night of Ramadan, and the Christian St. George's Cathedral on that side of Jerusalem. And then my friends who were Jewish, you know, getting to participate in some of the things they did in their homes on Shabbat. It was a powerful experience. And in part, I think it was recognizing that sometimes places of pilgrimage are not only connected to some of our deepest stories of identity and deepest longings for connection with the holy, but also places of deep pain.
Yeah.
Western Wall, for example, was a place I kept going back to in my 2 weekends that I got to spend in Jerusalem when I was working on an archaeological dig, and so we only had certain days we could get away. And the devotion of the people who were there praying, because that was the closest they could be to, you know, the sacred foundation stone of the temple, and thinking about the centuries of grief bound up in the prayers that were offered there. You know, the Jewish culture doesn't like to refer to it as the Wailing Wall, but there is deep emotion in recognizing that the destruction of the temple was a painful part of their history as people of faith. And watching the devotion and the sacredness with which they approached the space and then backed away from the wall. You know, you don't turn your back on the wall, but you back out of its presence in a manner that is sacred. It was very moving to recognize that places of pilgrimage can also be places where we go to remember painful parts of human history. And so it took me to other experiences I've had where I went to places like Oświęcim in Poland to witness Auschwitz and the horror of the Holocaust, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, other parts of going specifically for lament, specifically to remember and to make a public witness to something that has deeply wounded humanity and needs maybe acts of penitence aren't necessarily mine to take on, but we learned a lot about the German people's history with creating memorials that didn't glorify what had happened, but were more public acts of expiation for what had transpired in the name of the people. So I think I've been very formed in how some of our longing and our grieving is so intertwined that you can't always peel them apart. So pilgrimage can be a painful experience too. It's not only joyful and transformative in a happy way. It's sometimes very draining.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced that very same thing on the pilgrimage to Ghana. And I was supposed to go back again last year before coronavirus hit and lead, along with John Thompson Cordy, lead a group over there. And hopefully I want to go back again, because Ghana was another place where, Africa was another place where and this is partly because of the relationships, the deep relationships we have with people there, but something about Cape Coast really felt like a spiritual home for me too. But that's a very painful thing for me, because what was so mind-blowing about, like we went to kind of a Wailing Wall there, but it was a spot called the Last Bath, which is where in the Ghanaian government has set up a national heritage site there, and it's really beautiful. But it's a spot where people who were kidnapped from their homes were bathed and then were enslaved and then taken from there to the slave port and then transported away. And so it's just, we had a tour guide, and he was very just very, very good, and and was a very religious person, and really talked about in terms of the place being holy ground. Like he invited us all to take our shoes off before he left, because he said, "This is holy ground you're walking on." And I know that, you know, one of the things we do is he was Christian. He said, I think he was actually Anglican. He said, we when we walk on holy ground. And there was something about standing at the edge of that river where, and I was with people who were descendants of slaves. Like one of the participants on the trip had a picture of one of her great grandmothers who was a picture of her after she was freed from slavery, from being enslaved. And so we had me, I had several of my descendants. I mean, my people have been in the United States for, 400 years and been here since the 1600s. And I have documentation that shows that I have descendants who enslaved people. And so, it was weird because, I mean, it was really just this very thin, intense moment, because here you have descendant of enslavers, you have descendants of slaves, and then you have Ghanaians, John Thompson Cortes from Ghana, who's there, who's descendants of people who collaborated with the slavers, who lived in a community around because they or escaped or fought them. And it was just like this real nexus, and it was not pleasant at all. It was holy, but it was very holy in its pain, in the purity of the pain, in of being in this place, and also, being able to reclaim it, kind of being able to say prayers there. And they had a thing where we would toss a rock in the water, and then one of the participants in the pilgrimage sang, I think she sang "All My Trials." I mean, it was really beautiful. And all the African American folks we sensed they all sort of stood off by themselves, and all of us, we kind of sensed that there's a sense of us all kind of needing our space. And it was, yeah, I was really wanting to go back there again. Yeah, so we've got a good comment here from Stanley. When we talk about pilgrimage, we tend to begin with apartness that is away from the mundaneness of our lives. Yes, but we also consider our life's journeys to potentially be pilgrimages as well. Wow. What is important is how we journey with attentiveness, self-awareness, and love. Stanley, that's my kind of thinking. That's a good segue, because one of the questions I always like to deal with is, what's the difference between a pilgrimage and a trip? And I love that question of how can our lives be treated as pilgrimages? You want to take a stab at that first, Sarah? I've been yakking a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I love the question about what counts as set apart, because I think the tendencies that we have in our day-to-day lives is to think, oh, well, this part is holy and this part is not, what mundane, secular, whatever word you want. And there is this interesting way a pilgrimage has of flipping that upside down as you take time apart from usual routines and seek this particular encounter with the holy in a special place. I'm thinking especially my mother's side of the family is Roman Catholic, and my grandmother made pilgrimage to Fatima.
Oh, wow.
The Marian Shrine is a place that people will seek to go, particularly with intentions for healing and seeking God's healing because of what has transpired there, and the power of people who had gone as pilgrims and had experienced a miraculous healing in their life, in their body, in their minds, and in their circumstances. And so there is this interesting way that even if you think about Marian apparitions and the stories and the encounters that people have had in human tradition and human experience, the things that are recounted are of them feeling that power and transformation, but being sort of sent back to their lives to bear witness to the sacred.
Yeah.
Right where they are. And not only because of this miracle that had happened within them, but because God's presence is already there back home. And so I think it is fascinating that we need these times, and perhaps it's because our normal life is such a deluge of inputs, right? There's schedules and family members and household chores and errands to run and food to get and all that kind of stuff, cooking to do. And I think that sometimes that blunts our perception and in noticing how the holy is suffused in everything. And famous monastics will challenge us to notice that I love to go to a monastery and have retreats there, but the monks are like,
I've never been
this experience with God right back where you're usually. So it's interesting. And I think Stanley's logic absolutely applies, that if we turn our eyes toward what is God doing all the time around us, and how do we show up, how do we notice attentiveness, to use your word, Stanley, how do we stay connected, that self-awareness, and love by seeking God in the moment, by turning with eyes that look for the good. I think our media and our culture primes us to look for being reactive to the things that we're not pleased with in our day-to-day. And I think that the spiritual life does challenge us to recognize the pilgrimage inward is to notice God and turn toward God rather than toward all the other things that we could get revved up about. And I think that's absolutely right, Stanley, that recognizing that coming apart helps us see that there is no fissure between holy and unholy, but that God is in all and wanting to encounter us in all, even in the painful parts of our life, even in the things that don't go well. You hear people talk about all the time, well, yeah, this is a horrible thing, and God still did this coming out of it. So that journey can go in that direction if we're willing to let it take us there.
Yeah, I think I discovered through pilgrimage practice that I'm very Benedictine in my spirituality in that way, and that the image that I get of Benedictines on a monastery is the kind of prayer practice, but also the just stopping what you're doing and praying. That you practice your spirituality in the midst of, but also this element of disengagement that's also important. Not kind of cutting yourself off, but more disengaging from routines and from norms and from habits and from pleasures and from pain, that I found to be very important. I mean, you mentioned the whole thing about not letting kids have their phones. That was always a very important part of youth pilgrimages. And anytime I lead a youth pilgrimage, it's an absolute rule, is that kids can take their phones, but I don't want to see them out. Like I can't tell them what to do in their rooms, but I challenge them to leave their phones at home. And they can't take a camera either. That I have adult leaders who take thousands of pictures. And then I say to them, if you see something that you want a picture of, just come get one of us and we'll do it for you. And I've had, just almost to a person, every single kid that's gone on pilgrimage with me has said, the greatest thing about this was not using my phone during the day and not having a camera, because it forced me to, and I really like Phil Cousineau a lot. He came, were you at All Saints when he came to All Saints to talk?
No.
Yeah, he was friends with an All Saints member. And so he came to speak, and he talks about seeing with the eyes of your heart. That pilgrimage is sort of shock treatment in getting you to do that. And there is kind of a process, as I mentioned before, and the phases really are, and you're welcome to read Cousineau's book later, but they kind of follow to put you have kind of a threshold, departure, a thing they call descent or labyrinth, where you sort of find yourself discombobulated and disoriented and maybe even a little angry or tired. And then there's a thing called arrival, where you go, I'm here. You know, like it sounds like you had that experience at the Wailing Wall. I had it in Ghana at the river, right? In Ireland, I had it at this place called Priest Rock, which is where the Cromwellians took all of these dissenting Catholic priests out to this rock and murdered them all in front of all their people, right? And so it's this holy spot, kind of like the Wailing Wall, kind of like the river. And then you have a thing called bringing. You mentioned this earlier. You know, what is it you can take back? We call it bringing back the boon. That you are conscious of buying actual gifts. You know, tchotchke for people. When I went on pilgrimage at All Saints, I always brought back just tons of keychains and refrigerator magnets and T-shirts for people, but also the stories and the ways in which your heart has and your soul have widened that you can tell about, and the ways in which you were humbled or changed that you're then able to tell people about later, after you do what they call the arrival. And I think that's a cycle, Stanley, that I have found is repeatable in everyday life, but there is taking the moment of saying, okay, this is going to be that kind of day when that's going to happen. And I do this sometimes on a day when I'm having to clean house or when I'm just at home, or I mentioned that I have an Edison e-bike. I'll get on my e-bike and go and have it good and charged up and have a big thing of water, and I'll get out a map and I'll just head in a certain direction and kind of go and for a while and take a couple of books with me. And there's always this moment where I think, I got all this stuff I got to do. But then at some point during the day, you'll feel it sort of melting away once you kind of take a little time, you know, putting these down and, you know, stopping looking at Twitter and things, and letting your soul reset.
I'm thinking about the word mundane that you use, Stanley, and
Yeah.
one of the practices that part of what Tim and I were thinking about in this time where we can't go anywhere on pilgrimage presently and the pandemic are these practices that have been mined and bequeathed to us in this time from having had those encounters. And this is a labyrinth that one of my friends who died, she used in her final days in hospice, and she left it to me. It's the Shart Labyrinth, which many of you know that design because it's in various labyrinths that are available to walk in this city. But you know, the interesting thing about such a design and a pattern is it's fairly predictable. You know, the twists and the turns after you sort of get into the rhythm, like it's almost, you could almost say it's mundane. And part of the spiritual journey, I think for most of us, invites us to recognize that it's in that faithfulness of sort of flowing with God and trusting God, even when things feel predictable or boring, or you know, mundane, that's where God shows up to do things that we might not even imagine. And that's where our trust grows, in learning to have that journey inward be one in which we can show up, whether it's novel and exciting and takes us to far off places, or invites us to take a turn into some of the parts of our souls that need some cleaning. You know, like I love that you use the cleaning metaphor, Tim, because I feel like the spiritual journey at deeper and deeper levels will invite us to encounter, here are some things that God wants to shine that healing light on, and are we going to let God go there with us and invite God's love to change that part of who we are? And I think the mundaneness provides like a safe enough container for some of that to be possible.
Yeah, you know, I love that you held up that labyrinth, and that's I love that image of mundane. And I've also done, have you done the Camino before?
Not yet.
Yeah, well, you got to do it. And I urge any of you, if you can, do the Camino. It's a little bit hard, but I've known all kinds of people to do the 80, what is it, 80 kilometer or 80-mile one. And that's something that I love about that, is that you're literally putting one foot in front of the other for several hours at a time, and that's all you're doing. and it's physically uncomfortable. Your feet hurt, and it forces my brain to wander and to notice people around me, and then sometimes to turn inward and to stop noticing them. And it was just wonderful at the end of the day to really think back on the spectrum of experiences that I would have had, and the spectrum of conversations I would have had over the course of a day, just walking down this trail all day. It was hot and kind of dusty when we were there. And I love that notion of mundanity, because one of the things that I like about taking people on pilgrimage is that I also encourage people to put away the itinerary. You say, look, I got you. Like I'm looking forward on going on a pilgrimage someday. Where that's something I love about Ghana is I was on it, so I didn't have to worry about anything. But one of the ministries I love is taking people on pilgrimage. I like all the work involved with that. But there's something beautiful to be able to go on something like that, have someone say, I got you. You don't need to worry about the food. You don't need to worry about, just take your raincoat and some water and some good shoes, and you'll be fine today. And that's something else we would encourage people to do, because, Americans as travelers, stereotypically are really kind of horrible. They take up, they're loud and they take up too much space and are fussy. And so I would say to them, don't worry about the itinerary. And you'd have a kid who'd say, oh, I can't eat this. And be like, well, I got some power bars, but that's all we got. I guess you're going to go hungry. But you'll be okay. Don't worry. There's all kinds of little moments like that come about from disengaging from our usual linear, achievement-oriented ways of moving through time and space. Yeah.
And even the embracing of walking a labyrinth as a substantially equal experience of a pilgrimage is something that arose because some people couldn't afford to take a trip to the Holy Land, right? Like that's why cathedrals began to have those designs in the floor and the stone mosaics of their flooring, because inviting people into that experience and that practice is something that has deep significance. Sometimes we can't even understand or know until we look back. I love what Stanley mentioned about the intergenerational sway of this practice, of inviting people to discover what our ancestors bequeathed us. You mentioned, Tim, about our Scottish ancestry and going back to the land of our people. Me moving to Georgia, I also have Cherokee ancestry. And every time I'm up near the Trail of Tears, I have this deep stirring of wanting to understand more about that part of our family history and understand how that has affected our people. I love what you said, Stanley, about talking about those thin places that, you can never imagine. I think that is the Holy Spirit and the way God draws us into community, into, the communion of saints, of our communities that have existed and made it possible for us to be here, our family, our ancestors, and also the communities that we continue to forge with our younger family members or with people in our communities of faith. That's deeply powerful and deeply connecting, which makes me think of another spiritual practice that I wanted to throw out here this evening as we keep thinking about ways we can nourish this longing to make pilgrimage in a time where we can't go anywhere physically. Sybil Macbeth is the woman who wrote Praying in Color, and some of you may have encountered her before. It's fabulous, and it looks at prayer as this thin place that might lead us to hold up people that are in our hearts, people who are in our lives, people for whom we carry a lot. And right now, given what was happening in the last 48 hours, this book has seemed such a powerful tool. You know, some people don't feel particularly artfully inclined. I don't perceive of myself as an artist in any way. And yet this has invited me to take some of the practice of praying and open my heart up and my spirit up in different ways to let God put people on my heart. And one of the most powerful times I was working with this, I found myself drawing, and I don't like arachnids, but I found myself drawing this spider web, and I imagined in this prayer experience Jesus as like the healing minister that was going around this web, and it flipped my experience of spiders now, because binding up in this web was about healing grace and surrounding all these people that I love and was worrying about and praying for with love and healing power, and ministering to them in a way that I couldn't go and be with them, but God's powerful web of love was hanging on to all of them. And so I think sometimes we are drawn to try practices that might not even feel like us. And plumbing our ancestry, genealogical research is certainly something many people have been leaning into. And I think it does put us in touch with this way that God's love connects us and reminds us that the world is such a small place, and that everywhere we go, we discover people who hold the same hopes and longings in their hearts, and communities that are working to experience reconciliation and healing just like we are. And I think that's an interesting way for us to keep holding space, even as we can't go to some of these sacred places. So
you mentioned spiders, and one of the things that's happened to me time and again when I'm in pilgrimage space is there will be these themes that happen. Like when I was in Turkey, I would see birds everywhere. And one of the guys on the trip would see snails everywhere. And so it led him to reflect on the nature of the snail, you know, and how snails in their shells have the Fibonacci sequence and just this amazing creation. And I kid you not, and I wanted to ask you before we turn over for questions for a little while. I was just wondering if you had any quick sort of God moment anecdotes like this. The first pilgrimage I took at All Saints, we went to Turkey, and we went to St. Philip's Church that is way up on this hill, and it's a ruin, but there's still some tiles in the floor that were decorative and have all these designs, and there's a baptistry in there. Mm-hmm. So we're sitting there, and a couple of the boys start goofing around, and one of them gets in the baptistry, and the other one starts to dump water over his head. And I said, "Hang on a second." And I drew them all together, and we talked about baptism. I said, "Do any of y'all want to renew your baptismal vows right now? And if you want to, you know, we'll have this water." And it's not that we were rebaptizing. I said, "But, you know, I can pour a little water on your head. And this is a place where people did this 1,000 years ago, some of your spiritual ancestors." And it was incredible. It was incredible. So then we hiked down the hill, and me and all the leaders are sitting around this spot while the kids go get snacks and souvenirs. And we're talking about how we'd had this really incredible spiritual experience. And Kathy Roberts goes like this and points up, one of the chaperones. And I look up, and I'm not kidding. There is a dove sitting in the tree behind us. And I look up, and the dove goes, whoo, and flies off into the sun. And I was just like, "Oh, come on, you know, come on." Now, maybe it was coincidence, but if I had not been in that space and they had not been in that space, we wouldn't have noticed. So coincidence, I don't think so. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever experienced that before. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
I think some of those coincidences have been about people that I've encountered and the conversations that we've had.
Yeah.
I remember a couple such like divine appointments, as you might think about them, happening at the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and There was another such experience in Nazareth at the Basilica of the Annunciation, where this Roman Catholic community, we met some folks, and then they invited us to come back later on for a service, and
Yeah.
energies of ecumenism in Jerusalem with Roman Catholics and Episcopalians. It was one of those moments that you just thought, okay, there's something about this divine revelation that is inviting me to be transformed, and I think we're all in those moments happen in our daily lives, but to everyone's point, when we're away from our usual and customary, we tend to be more open and available for them. There's a question here from Nora.
But, you know, I've just been thinking, I've got too many stories like that to tell where I've been on flights saying I'm on a pilgrimage, and I start talking to somebody, or I meet, real quick. I finished Camino de Santiago, and we truck it there to get there for the 10:30 the 11 o'clock Pilgrim's Mass. Walk in, the place is full of tourists. So all of the pilgrims come in right at 11 because we've been walking since 4 a.m. Limping, dusty, sweaty, smelly. And in the pews are all tourists. And so I find a spot on the margins in the transepts, and I look out, and there's Edward. And then there's two other All Saints people, and there's a lady that I went to seminary with, and there's a spot on their pew. And Barbara Pendergrass goes, and I'm just like, oh, come on. Yeah. What would you recommend for people who don't have the physical ability to walk or go places? That's a great question. Something that comes to mind for me, Nora, is something that Catherine Meeks inspired that's been sort of a literary and intellectual pilgrimage, is that I'll take a year, usually every other year, and I will only read things when I'm reading for pleasure by people of color. Like right now, I'm only reading theology books and novels and poetry by African Americans and people of African descent. So I've been reading a lot. I'm about to start a book called Friday Black, and just finished Stamped from the Beginning. And so that's been sort of a way of doing pilgrimage. Another thing would be, there's several places that have labyrinths. The cathedral has a lovely one in front of Lanier House. All Saints actually has a canvas one that we bought when we were there. But
we have one here, that canvas one for foul weather, that before COVID, it was in Child Hall, so hopefully we'll be able to use that again.
The other idea that came to mind is that there are a lot of virtual, especially this past year, a lot of virtual experiences of Stations of the Cross. Contemporized versions of Stations of the Cross, which don't require walking. A lot of them have images or audio or a pairing of all of those. There's even some specific apps that I discovered last Holy Week when we were looking to be able to offer resources to folks where a particular theme, it might not necessarily be Jesus's journey to the cross, but some modern rendition or some thematic interpretation of who have been those suffering folks that are continuing to suffering, that we need to be motivated to take down from the cross, to use the theology of John Sobrino, for example. So I think there are plenty of visual and experiential ways to enter into the spirit of pilgrimage in such a way that you don't need to have physical ability to go walk in any way, Camino or Labyrinth or otherwise. My friend, at the end of her life, she was using this, if you have, the use of your fingers, but there's also films that are interesting. Martin Sheen has a film called The Way, which is about the Camino and his experience of loss and walking that way. And I think so that there are other ways to enter into that openness of encounter and of looking for connection. And I think even just entering into a particular practice of prayer. Pray as you go is an example of the Ignatian practices of prayer But the Ignatian exercises are another practice that kind of lead you on a journey using scripture. I know, Tim, you had mentioned at certain times of the year, you recommend people pick a certain gospel and read the whole way through. You can apply this idea of a progressive journey to different arts experiences and poetry. You know, that's another great way. I found a poem this evening in Malcolm Guite's Sounding of the Seasons. He writes sonnets for the seasons of the church year, and there's one on the Magi. And you know,
Polly, the Episcopal priest. I want you to read that, but remember the one you introduced me to, Polly
Murray.
Murray, who is an Episcopal priest.
Yes.
She's fantastic. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Dark Testament is her book of poems. It's hard to come by, though. Well, okay. So this
said that, though. Poetry is a way. I read poetry, try to read a poem every day, and one of the practices that I do is I read the same poem every day for a month. And I've really enjoyed George Herbert's poetry, and I've enjoyed Polly Murray's poetry, and that Crave Radiance, that lady, the one.
Elizabeth Alexander.
Yeah. Oh man, so good. Yeah.
Sarah, we gotta
wrap it up.
If you read your poem, and then
Tim will pray us out.
He will.
All right. Well, this is suited to the season, as yesterday was the Feast of the Epiphany. This is called the Magi. It might have just been someone else's story. Some chosen people get a special king. We leave them to their own peculiar glory. We don't belong. It doesn't mean a thing. But when these three arrive, they bring us with them. Gentiles, like us, their wisdom might be ours. A steady step that finds an inner rhythm. A pilgrim's eye that sees beyond the stars. They did not know his name, but still they sought him. They came from otherwhere, but still they found, in palaces, found those who sold and bought him, but in the filthy stable, hallowed ground. Their courage gives our questing hearts a voice, to seek, to find, to worship, to rejoice.
Good.
That's great.
Thanks for grabbing that. I love that. Who was that again?
Malcolm Guite.
Malcolm Guite.
He's also an Anglican priest.
David White's another good one, folks. Poetry's a really good one. So I'm going to close us with a prayer that I've had people pray on every pilgrimage. And if you ever hear me preach, I usually pray a piece of it right before I preach. And I'm not going to do the whole thing because it's really long. It's in the hymnal. It's a hymn. It's St. Patrick's Breastplate. And it's a super long and complicated hymn that I made them sing at my last service at St. All Saints. And I made them sing it at my ordination service. But it's a wonderful prayer because it talks about God, Christ everywhere. And it really just evokes a lot of images for pilgrimage. But Sarah, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'm glad we finally got to do this. And Jim and Nora, thanks for inviting us.
Thank you all for joining.
It's been a quick hour.
Yeah.
It really has.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let's pray. Christ be with me, Christ within me, Christ behind me, Christ before me, Christ beside me, Christ to win me, Christ to comfort and restore me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ in quiet, Christ in danger, Christ in hearts of all that love me, Christ in mouth of friend and stranger. I bind into myself the strong name of the Trinity, by invocation of the same, the three in one and one in three, by whom all nature hath creation, eternal Father, Spirit Word. Praise to the Lord of my salvation. Salvation is of Christ the Lord.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you both so much. It's been a wonderful hour. I wanted to let you know that next week we'll have Reverend Lindsay Bueller from St. Bede's and the Reverend Dr. Bobby Patterson from the Church of the Epiphany, and they will be discussing building resilience through contemplative practices.
Ooh, that'll be good.
That'll be a great one. So thank you all for coming, and we will see you hopefully next week. Stay
Well,
safe.
thank you for having this. I have a whole new idea about what pilgrimage is. And now when I walk that labyrinth at the cathedral, I'll know better what I'm doing.
Good
This is really helpful. Thank you. Appreciate
night, everybody.
Night.
it. Night, night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Shira.
Bye, Tim. See you soon.